Okay, welcome to High Ground. My name is Tanner, and this is going to be a power ranking for the NAL going into week number 4. So we've already seen 6 playdays. There are only 3 more to go, and it really is crunch time. The games in these final 3 playdays will determine who will and who won't be going to the upcoming major, the Berlin major. And I think everybody except for Mirage has a realistic shot. I think technically Mirage still could make it, but it's so overwhelmingly unrealistic that we're not even going to really consider it. Everybody else has a good shot, and most of the teams probably need to win all of their games. Maybe you can drop a point or 2 by going to overtime, but everyone except for the top 2 or 4, say, probably needs to win all of their games if they do want it to make it to the major, because these standings are pretty close at the moment. So this is in tier list format, but the tiers aren't actually significant. This is just a way to display the information. I'm going to have 2 teams in each tier. It is going to be fully ordered, and this is the order in which I had the teams last week. At the end of the video, I think I'll have on screen how many positions any given team went up or down, so keep an eye out for that if you're interested. And I guess the last thing before we get into it, I'll tell you guys the standings. So from top to bottom, we have Oxygen on 13 points, Xset on 12, Sonics and TSM on 10, Dark Zero and Beast Coast on 9, Astralis, Space Station, and Parabellum on 8, and Mirage on 3. And that is where we're going to start. Mirage pretty clearly the weakest team in the league, but plagued by more COVID issues than just about any other team, them and Astralis having a lot of issues. Mirage, I think, have played all of their games online except for one, and you might even say that their one LAN game was their best showing. Their one win did come online, and that was their most recent game against Beast Coast, but you might say that they look like more of a cohesive unit against Space Station. They did lose that game, but they did take the 5 rounds. They were up at one point, up to interpretation. But yeah, you definitely have to say that they're the weakest team in the league. In the grand scheme of things, maybe they're not even that bad of a team. Just unfortunately for them, they play in the best regional league in the world. If they played in another region, maybe they'd be higher up on the standings in that region. But I also do wonder if maybe they would have a few more points on the board had they played on LAN the entire time. But that's not really here nor there. So we're going to move on. The next 4 teams I think are all pretty close. The next one I'm going to have is Space Station and how far they've fallen. They were so dominant in stages 2 and 3 of last season, and then they just missed out on the major last stage, and now they're sort of floundering. They probably have the worst shot of anybody except for Mirage to make the upcoming major. And they do have a pretty tough schedule coming up. They have to play against, I don't even remember who it is off the top of my head. I think Oxygen, TSM, and Astralis, I want to say. So really tough teams. All of them are going to be pretty high on the power ranking here. They lost to Beast Coast and they lost to Parabellum, and I'm going to have these 2 teams here. I'll talk about them in a second. And that's not very good teams to lose to. Teams that are going to be low on the power rankings, and then also teams that missed out on the major last stage who are, I mean, they're still gunning for the major now. They both still have a shot, but yeah, probably not exactly the teams you want to be losing to at the moment. They almost lost to Mirage, and other than that, they also lost to Xset. They got a win over Dark Zero, which is pretty solid, but that was one of the more asterisk kind of games this stage, I'd say. It was played online, and if I remember right, that might be the only Dark Zero game that's been played online. They also had a few glitches that sort of hampered their performance, Dark Zero that is, so I think probably Space Station still would have won if they played on LAN, given how dominant it was, assuming they played the same map and everything. But okay, so we'll consider that. I suppose I don't think it's enough to get them out of 9th place. Next up, Beast Coast and Parabellum. I think this is the hardest one to call between any 2 teams. They've played 4 of the same teams, and they've played each other. So they both beat Space Station, with Parabellum dropping a point by going to overtime. They both played against Oxygen and lost, and Parabellum got 1 point by going to overtime, losing in overtime. They both played against Xset. They both won, Beast Coast doing it in regulation, Parabellum also dropping a point by going to overtime, and they both played against Dark Zero, and they both got popped. So all of that comes out to 1 additional point for Beast Coast, putting them on 9, and Parabellum on 8. They played each other, as I mentioned. Beast Coast got the win. A lot of what I'm doing here is going to be informed by head-to-heads, because it is just the most direct comparison. It's not always the most useful thing overall, but as one single data point, it probably is. Sometimes teams match up poorly against one other team, but pretty good against the rest of the field. But again, as the most direct point of comparison, I'm going to have to give it a decent amount of weight. So good for Beast Coast there. The other game each of these teams played, Beast Coast lost to Mirage. They lost to the worst team in the league, and Parabellum beat Astralis, the best team in the league last stage. So that's a pretty big disparity. Based on that, I almost want to give it to Parabellum, but that is another one of those asterisk games that was played online. Astralis had a sick DP fire, so I have to count that a little bit less. And so with Beast Coast having the head-to-head and the fact that they've been much hotter than Parabellum recently, a lot of Parabellum's points came early in the stage. And yes, Beast Coast did just lose their last game. Parabellum did win their most recent game, but in the 3 days before that, Beast Coast was 3-0, Parabellum was 1-2. I'm going to give the nod to Beast Coast here. The next up, we have Dark Zero. They have really convincing wins over both Beast Coast and Parabellum, and I think that's a big reason I'm putting them here. They had that weird loss versus Space Station I talked about, and their other win against TSM, they got that in the most recent play day, and I don't know, it doesn't feel especially good putting Dark Zero here because they got that win. TSM, an excellent team to have beaten this stage, but they had to sub out Geo for Gotcha in that game due to some sort of medical issue with Geo. So would they have won anyways? I'm not sure. I don't think so, but it was a pretty decisive result for Dark Zero. So I don't know. It's hard to call things. I can't just say for sure they would have lost if TSM had Geo. So I'm still going to put Dark Zero here. I'm going to give them the nod. And another reason to do so is the fact that they were the only team out of all 5 of these teams to go to the major last stage, and they won the major. So I'm going to put Dark Zero here. I'm going to rock with that. Next up, Astralis. So they're actually below Dark Zero and Beast Coast on points. Both these two teams have 9, and then Astralis has 8 along with Parabellum and Space Station. But they've been hampered by COVID issues, very much so similarly to Mirage. In the very first play day, they had to sub out DP Fire for call out. They had to play with a coach, and they still got the win. And then in the next 3 days, they had to play online with a sick player. So I think that they'd certainly have more points on the board. I don't know how many more, but some amount more if they played on LAN with all healthy players. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt there. And then in the most recent week, they got a win over Dark Zero and they lost to Oxygen. So pretty good team to beat in Dark Zero. Not the best, not the worst. And they lost to Oxygen, probably the best team to lose to because they are the top team in the league at the moment. And so, yeah, I'm happy enough to put Astralis here. Again, I think they have a lot of wasted potential because of what's happened to them. And as they showed last stage, they were so good. I think it's entirely possible for them to make the major because they do have a pretty easy schedule going forward. I don't remember off the top of my head. It's 2 of the teams that are below them that they still need to play, and then 1 of the teams above them. And if they do play all those teams, I think it's entirely possible that they can beat all those teams. I'm going to have them here at 5th. Then moving up, so TSM and Sonics were the 2 teams that I had at the top of the power rankings last week. Neither of them had especially good weeks. 1-1 for Sonics, 0-2 for TSM. And TSM was a full 3 points ahead of Sonics last week. That's why even after a 1-1 from Sonics, they are still on the same number of points. TSM has the head-to-head over Sonics, and also TSM, you have to give them a little bit of a break because, yeah, they had to sub out their best player this stage, Geo, for their coach, and so I have to imagine they would have at least had a closer game versus Dark Zero, if not just straight up win against them, had that not been the case. So I'm going to have them above Sonics. Sonics finally got their win streak ended in this most recent day. They lost to Xset, and in fact, both of these teams lost to Xset, so that really jumps up Xset. They were what did I have them in, like 6 or something last week? So a massive improvement, but that going 2-0 and beating the top 2 teams from the previous week will do that. So Xset on 12 points, a full 2 points ahead of these 2 teams and 3 or more points ahead of everyone else besides Oxygen is pretty massive. And I think Xset is on the comeback. They have these 2 solid wins here, but 2 kind of puzzling losses here, and then the win over Space Station as well. And Mirage is their other game, I think. And so, yeah, I think all things considered, I'm happy to have them up here. Pretty impressive team, and I think they probably have even maybe a few more points on the board had they had a coach with them the whole time. Bodega not being around, Vivas only showing up for the most recent day, and because they will still have Vivas for the rest of the stage, I think their shot is pretty good, and I think they're a really good team that should perform perhaps even better than they have this stage, given the fact that they do not now have that coach. And that finally leaves Oxygen very top of the pile, and I mean, you can't argue with the results. They are 5-1. They lost to Sonics, and then other than that, they beat everyone they've played. They lost a couple points by going to overtime, but a win's a win, and I suppose that did cost them some points. It was sort of scary. They had to make comebacks, but 5-1 is pretty hard to argue with. They were good last stage, and they seem to be really good this stage. Newer's better than last stage, Vertical worse than last stage. So I do think for that reason, maybe a little bit of a swingy team. If Newer starts performing worse than he has, maybe they might drop a few games, and a few games might be enough to make them miss the major. But on the other hand, if Vertical starts playing better than he has this stage, if he starts playing like he did in the previous 2 stages, that might be enough to easily win them every game going forward. So yeah, I think Oxygen deserves to be the top of the pile, and this is going to be in my power ranking. Feel free to let me know your own. I suppose on screen here I will have the the changes from last week, how many positions any given team moved. And so, right, with all of that being said, if you have any other comments, feel free to leave them below. A like and a subscription would be appreciated. And so I will catch you guys in the next video.